Hey there, Scars of Honor community, long time no see. I was busy exploring the dungeons of Aragon in the past couple of months, and I stumbled upon our game designer, who we actually haven't seen since the last video that we recorded with him.
Being locked up in a dungeon is not fun. After the first couple of hours, it gets quite dark and moist, typically, because those are usually set in the underground.
We can now remove the missing posters from around the office. Actually, I want to use this opportunity to record something for our fans. I wanted to talk with you about designing dungeons in 2023. Maybe we should begin this conversation with, how would you define what a dungeon is in modern gaming?
If we look at just the word dungeon, the definition is very far from what a video gamer might expect when he hears the word dungeon. Dungeons originated as a place to hold prisoners. However, if you're talking to a gamer about a dungeon, typically what they might imagine is an instance-based adventure, which is typically self-contained. It usually hosts a wide array of volatile dangers that all of the players must work together to get around. That could feature traps or enemies or any environmental obstacles they might miss. Typically, the adventure should be satisfactory within itself. So towards the end, most game designers like to situate a boss, as dungeons are expected to host a lot of danger. They usually also try to lure in players with promises of great loot and promises of great treasures, which will enhance their powers further.
You can think of dungeon as a short story within the novel that the game is.
Definitely, dungeons can fit different roles. They can be very tightly connected to the storyline of a game or the overall world, but also it is a place where you can space yourself out of the whole situation of the world, since it's within its own instance. So I believe also, as game designers and game writers, we are also presented with the opportunity to tell self-contained stories in a way, if we want to. So a dungeon could be very tightly connected to the overarching story. The final boss could be connected to the world, the story, all of the NPCs you've been talking to so far. Or you can just go in and it could be a tribe of giant fire spiders which have just inhabited a cave, and you're supposed to clear it out.
When we release our dungeons for public testing, what kind of feedback would it be useful for you as a game designer?
For us, it's mostly important to find out if players are having a good time when playing our dungeons. If you're going through our dungeon and something sticks out as inherently bad or inherently good, it would be very nice for players to tell us this, so we can know what they like or dislike and adjust our direction based on the feedback. In addition to this, difficulty is going to be an interesting one, and it's going to take some time to get it right. And lastly, I would say the flow of the dungeon. So if a person feels like at a certain point there is too much downtime, or at a certain point there is too much action going on, or they're overwhelmed, or they cannot handle all of the mechanics at the same time, or it's too simple for them, all of this should be shared with us through either our YouTube comments or our forums or a Discord, which we all keep track of. So we can actually take that feedback and apply it.
Absolutely. So few invited to participate in this discussion, because after all, Scars of Honor is a project that really tries to just make the game that you want to play and that we want to play. Yeah. As a gamer, what do you expect from a dungeon in 2023?
There are certain standard elements which have become standard throughout the years. So a dungeon without a boss at this point feels incomplete. Typically, there should be a great challenge towards the end. This is kind of starting from the wrong opposite way. However, following the design philosophy, everything inside of that dungeon should be very cohesive. So if we look at it from an art perspective, the whole environment should really immerse you from the start. You should be able to tell which dungeon you're in simply by looking at the visuals. They should be spectacular enough by themselves to impress the player purely visually. When we're talking about game design, which is where I'm more expertise, the dungeon needs to work around its visual design, as in the environment should represent the visual style. For example, if your character specific class is an Italian plumber, and your current quest is to save a princess from a fire-breathing lizard. If you enter the castle, and the entire castle is covered in ice, and you have to dodge icicles, but then the final boss breathes fire at you, it doesn't really make any cohesive sense. So all of the dungeons should work together to present a cohesive design. This would feature the environment, the hazards, traps, which are kind of similar to hazards, but not always, puzzles, if included, since all of these are not mandatory. Every dungeon can feature all of these elements. Traps, NPCs to fight, or mobs, environmental obstacles, perhaps cooperative puzzles, a boss, and also there should be tension throughout the dungeon about keeping on your toes and what could be around the next corner. You never want the player to kind of expect to know what's going to be following him. So dungeons need to get more diverse in general. Throughout the years, there hasn't been a lot of progression in the tools that are typically placed inside of a dungeon. As a gamer, it's really easy to say all of this, but different people have different preferences.
Yeah.
Some people will enjoy more combat, some people enjoy more puzzles, so it is good to have variety in everything. And maybe some dungeons should be, in my opinion, more heavily puzzle-oriented to satisfy players who want to really get into a serious brain buster and settle down and sit down and figure things out, whereas other players just want to go in and kill stuff and just enjoy and have fun and dodge explosions and react quickly to things coming their way. So this is where also people from our community should tell us what they expect to see in inside of our dungeons, so that we can better adapt them to everybody's preferences in the future.
Absolutely. Feel free to start up a discussion in the comment section where we can talk about all sorts of healthy dungeon practices that we want to see.
And player expectations.
Yeah, not only from Scars of Honor, but in games in general. Yeah, since you mentioned cooperative play, I wanted to ask, what is the multiplayer element inside of a dungeon? How do you design the dungeon so it is played by different kinds of people, groups of people that most likely have not met before entering the dungeon together?
Yeah, so this is a difficult one to get right in MMORPGs, I believe. So dungeons in MMORPGs typically have a minimum requirement of some a gear score or something similar to that, so that you can actually even enter it. So barring that, you already have a minimum bar of entrance where you have to have played a game for a certain amount of time to be able to even participate in certain dungeons, essentially. This is not always a healthy practice, so I would prefer it if every dungeon can be beaten by any player, and this is why we're going with an approach where dungeons are going to be scaling together with the player. So dungeons, ideally, will just be adding new mechanics on top and new challenges for you as you're progressing and learning the game. Already knowing that dungeons are some of the most dangerous places inside of our world, it is expected that players should not have the ability to go through them alone. A certain playable class should not be able to go through all of the challenges that a certain dungeon might oppose to them. With this in mind, collaboration is always going to be key, as the monsters there are going to be stronger, so the people with less health points really should stay out of their way. Traps and visual cues around the world for where danger is going to be coming from are also very important. Really looking into a design approach where all of the elements of the dungeon would require one form of cooperation between the players. However, we also do not want to restrict the players to any specific obligatory classes that they have to bring into any dungeon. So it is a challenge, and we're still looking at different methods at how to solve this, but the end goal is to achieve that feeling.
Also, a very good moment for our viewers to actually add in the comments what is a fun prompt to cooperate in any sort of a game that you've played ever.
Tell us your favorite puzzles, your favorite dungeons in the comments. Just give us things that you like so we know what to look at.
As a game designer, what do you want to see in dungeons from here on?
Dungeons have been stagnated for a while, with, as I mentioned, very few elements being utilized to their maximum. I think certain elements which are underutilized at the moment could be listed, such as light inside of dungeons. Light can be a great atmospheric tool, and it can point the player in the correct direction. It can obscure things from their vision when they're not supposed to view it from a certain angle. And while we're on that topic, perspective is also very underrated. Most hidden elements and hidden things in dungeons are typically just centered around hoping that the player is going to go hugging every wall and just check every crevice and see if there's going to be a hidden treasure somewhere. However, this is not always the best way to go about it, and you can attract the player's attention visually through the environment or through locations of certain elements and guide them through the dungeon in a more natural way where their sense of exploration matches with the flow of the level, and it can create a very natural feeling where you feel like everything is placed where it should be.
I also wanted to ask you, what is the heart of a dungeon experience? If we strip everything else from it, what are we left with?
At the heart of every type of dungeon is cooperation. Regardless if it's a story-based dungeon or one where narrative takes the back seat instead for action to take the front seat. The end goal, however, or the satisfaction you might get from it could be different. So the outcome of beating a very hard story-contained dungeon, which is related to the overworld and all of the quests you've been doing so far, probably is going to bring you a lot of satisfaction from just progressing that and learning more about the world, seeing what happens with the characters once you defeat them. Hopefully you're going to have some level of anticipation when you're going up to them and finally going to face your foes, which you've been hyped up to be engaged with in combat. Whereas in the other type of dungeon, where you do not have that grand final goal, but you might as well just be going in there to get some loot or grind a piece of gear, which is essential for your progression, for your character in this case. In the essence of it all should be a ability of replayability, where the dungeon shouldn't feel stagnated. Perhaps certain elements might change as you revisit dungeons. Perhaps dungeons might shift around. Who knows for now? However, cooperation and the level of satisfaction from completing the dungeon should be awarded to the player. And the way that you achieve this is either through good storytelling, proper gear, or rewarding enough gear, and actually providing a sufficient enough challenge so that cooperation is actually required.
Since we're talking not only about game design now, but also about environment and storytelling, obviously the design of a dungeon is actually cooperation in itself between you, the environment artists, and the storyteller. How does that work behind the scenes?
Yes, so the whole process is very interesting. We typically start by igniting a conversation between game designers and the story writer of the game. So first we try to settle on, is it going to be a major dungeon or not? Is it going to progress the overall story or not? Because if we are creating a dungeon which is a self-contained story within itself, we kind of have more creative freedom to experiment with everything, and we don't have to keep the whole overarching story in check. We don't always have to go and see, is this okay because a character did something in the past? Does this align with their persona? Is the location adequate for, where they should be situated?
And also, why is this super important war leader just relaxing in a cave? Doesn't he have responsibilities?
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't make sense. Having finished our conversations with the story writer, we can actually move on to the art department, where we can look at different concepts which we might have from the past. We might revisit some of them, change them, or come up with completely new ones. However, we typically like to start off either with settling upon what the environment is going to be like, or what maybe some of the enemies you're going to be encountering inside of that instance are. And from then on, we can start off with spinning up a narrative and thinking about what is going to be the story inside of this essential micro world we're going to be creating. Having settled upon the theme from then, we can actually go into the level design. And this is where a lot of the fun for us happens, because we get to experience a lot of creative freedom, try to create very engaging situations, and think of the level or as the dungeon as a level and something that you're going to have to go through multiple times, not just once. So typically the way we approach it is we create different segments containing various hazards, would it be enemies or traps or other things you're going to be encountering in the future. having those different segments created then allows us to go back and really evaluate on the different difficulty settings and keep testing and reiterating and moving things around and creating different iterations so that we can really experiment in-house with how everything is feeling and hopefully soon get it out to the players for some testing.
What advice would you give to young game designers who are just about to start making their first dungeon?
Study the mistakes of others. As with everything else in game design, there's no need to repeat others' mistakes. There have already been people who are more experienced than you, for sure, who have done this or approached this task. So first off, begin with planning, learn, study, find out how to do it. As with everything in game design, this is pretty much the most essential step. And from then on, just tap into that creativity and try to make something that is a bit unique, at least. Try to create a good flow, follow the principles of basic level design. Don't start by overwhelming your players with new mechanics. Introduce things slowly, pick up the pace as you're going, and just try to create an awesome adventure for your players.
Well, Mishu, thank you so much for this amazing discussion. You can actually leave the dungeon now.
Oh my god, I'm gonna get to see the sunlight now.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to follow all the latest news about Scars of Honor. We now also have a companion app that you can download from the App Store or Google Play, where you can participate in a daily dungeon where you can get some exciting rewards like mounts or even support accounts. We also have a merch store, so now you can get hoodies, buy a hat, a shoe, 2 shoes, everything. You can get everything, literally. Anyways, guys, this is all from us for today, and see you next time.